Twilight was enveloping the city streets as Emily and her parents moved into the ancient house on the outskirts of town, a place brimming with the mysteries of the past. Her room was on the second floor, directly beneath the attic, where, as it turned out, a story awaited its unveiling. The house was vast, with numerous rooms and nooks, and each step on its wooden floors echoed in the silence. While unpacking boxes, Emily stumbled upon a small hatch leading to the attic. Opening it, she saw a stairway plunging everything into impenetrable darkness. Her curiosity overcame her fear, and she decided to peek inside. She took a flashlight and climbed the narrow wooden stairs that creaked under every step. The attic was filled with old furniture, cardboard boxes, and items that seemed to have been collecting dust for decades. Among all the clutter, Emily noticed a small, faded doll sitting on an old wooden chest. The doll was dressed in a pale pink dress, and its porcelain face was covered with cracks. Its eyes, old-fashioned and glassy, seemed to stare directly at Emily. Struck by the sight, she picked up the doll, and it seemed to her that she felt a faint warmth from it. She decided to take the doll to her room. Back in her room, she placed the doll on a shelf opposite her bed. That night, Emily slept poorly. She dreamt strange dreams, flickering images of the attic, vague figures whispering among the old furniture, and the doll whose eyes suddenly came to life in the gloom. When she woke up, her gaze inadvertently fell on the shelf, where the doll was now missing. Startled, Emily gathered her thoughts and searched the room until she found the doll on the floor by her bed. She put it back on the shelf, deciding it must have fallen on its own. However, as she went to sleep that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was watching her all the time. In the following days, Emily noticed strange things, whispering in the hallways, light tapping on the windows at night despite there being no wind. The doll continued to disappear and then reappear in the most unexpected places. Sometimes Emily found it sitting in a chair in the living room, sometimes in the kitchen. It became her obsession. She began reading old newspapers and documents stored in the house, hoping to find some clue about the doll. Her efforts were rewarded when she found an old article about a little girl who had died in this house a century ago, clutching a similar doll. The article told of a girl named Sarah who lived with her parents and had a large collection of dolls. One day, she mysteriously disappeared, and her body was found in one of the locked rooms, dead, with the doll in her arms. After this tragedy, Sarah's parents left the house, leaving everything untouched. Legend said that the spirit of the girl still wandered the house, seeking company among her dolls. Having read this, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Now it was clear to her why the doll seemed so real. It was the embodiment of Sarah's spirit. 6. With each passing day, Emily found it increasingly difficult to calm herself, feeling a mysterious connection to the doll, which seemed not just an object, but something more alive and aware. One night, she decided to lock the doll in a chest in the attic, hoping it would end her nightly torments. She took the doll and climbed up to the attic, but when she opened the chest, she found an old notebook covered in dust and cobwebs. The cover was embossed with the name, Sarah. Emily felt a chill run through her, but her curiosity once again took over. Opening the notebook, she discovered it was Sarah's diary. The diary was filled with entries about the little girl's daily life, her friends, games, but gradually the entries became darker, more troubling. Sarah wrote about how the dolls spoke to her at night, whispering about things that were to happen. The last entry was the most disturbing. Mom says dolls are just toys, but they are not just toys. They want to take me with them. Emily closed the diary, her heart racing, feeling a deep sympathy for little Sarah. The next night, the doll disappeared again. Emily found it in the same locked room where Sarah had once been found. The room was cold and covered in a layer of dust, as if it hadn't been opened for years. The doll was sitting on an old sofa, and it seemed to be looking at the door as if waiting for someone. Emily began to feel an increasing sense of anxiety and fear, realizing that meddling with these events might have unpredictable consequences. the girl decided to seek help from a local priest who had experience with such phenomena. He listened attentively, nodding, and then said that a cleansing ritual was necessary. They both returned to the house where the priest began reciting prayers and sprinkling the rooms with holy water. All the while, the doll watched them with an unchanging gaze, causing Emily an indescribable sense of dread. After the ritual, the atmosphere in the house changed. The nights became calmer, and the doll stopped moving on its own. Emily felt relieved, but also profoundly exhausted. She realized that interacting with the unseen world had left its mark on her. She decided to leave the doll in the locked room, leaving it in peace once and for all. Although peace returned to the house deep in her heart, Emily knew that Sarah's and the doll's story would always be part of this place. 5 teenagers, always hungry for adventure and exploration of the unknown, decided to test their courage by spending a night at an old, abandoned psychiatric hospital located on the outskirts of a small town in Massachusetts. This hospital had a notorious reputation, with locals telling tales of eerie screams and unexplained disappearances. Mark, Sarah, Jason, Emily, and Tyler ignored these warnings, armed with nothing but flashlights and a video camera, driven by a mix of fear and excitement. As they approached the ominous structure under the cover of a cloudy, moonless night, they found the main entrance securely locked, with windows boarded up, but a rusted side door at the back swung open with a haunting creak, inviting them into the depths of the dark, forsaken building. Once inside, they felt the chilling embrace of the air, heavy with the stench of mold and decay. The hall was vast, with echoes of their footsteps bouncing off the walls, giving life to the silence. They set up camp in what seemed like a common area, with tattered remnants of old furniture and faded murals depicting pastoral scenes in stark contrast to their grim surroundings. They agreed to explore in pairs, while one person stayed behind to monitor their makeshift camp. The first shift fell to Mark and Sarah, who ventured forth with their flashlights piercing the darkness, casting long, sinister shadows as they moved deeper into the hospital. Their exploration led them upstairs, where the remnants of the hospital's operational days lay scattered. Dusty charts and broken medical equipment littered the floor, and each room told a story of despair. Old patient records, left carelessly on a moldy desk, spoke of experimental treatments and hopeless cases. As they delved further, a sudden chill swept through the hallway, and the faint sound of a child's giggle echoed in the distance, sending shivers down their spines. They followed the sound, drawn by curiosity and dread, to a locked ward labeled high risk. Meanwhile, back at the camp, Jason, Emily, and Tyler heard unsettling noises from above. It started as a soft tapping, then grew into a frantic scuttling that seemed to surround them. Armed with only their lights, they decided to search for their friends, calling out their names only to have their voices swallowed by the darkness. As they ascended the same staircase, the temperature dropped and the air grew thick with the smell of antiseptic and something rotten. Each step forward seemed to lead them further from safety and deeper into the hospital's haunted past. Upstairs, Mark and Sarah found the ward unlocked, surprisingly. The door creaked open to reveal a long abandoned section of the hospital where the most troubled patients had once been kept. Inside, the walls were scratched, with incoherent words and phrases etched into the paint, hinting at the immense suffering that had permeated these rooms. The children's laughter turned into whispers, as if multiple voices were speaking at once, yet no one was there. The air grew colder, and their flashlight beams flickered as if something was moving just beyond the light's reach. As Jason, Emily, and Tyler reached the upper floor, they reunited with Mark and Sarah in the high-risk ward. Together, they experienced a growing sense of dread. The flickering of their flashlights became more frequent, and then all at once the lights went out, plunging them into utter darkness. Panicked, they tried to find their way back, but the layout seemed to have changed, with corridors twisted and doors vanished. The whispers grew louder, now menacing, and the faint giggling turned into a cacophony of cries and screams. As they stumbled blindly, they realized too late that the hospital was alive with the tormented souls of its past, and escape was no longer an option. The friends finally stumbled upon what appeared to be the old administrative wing, hoping it might offer a clearer path back, or even an exit. However, as they entered, they discovered that the room was filled with rows of dusty, disused filing cabinets and collapsed shelves, papers strewn all over the floor. Amid the clutter, old patient photos scattered across the desks looked up at them with hollow, unseeing eyes, adding to the creeping dread. The air here was colder, and a soft, continuous murmur seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the very history of the place was whispering its dark secrets. As they ventured deeper into the administrative wing, the murmur grew into distinct voices, ghostly echoes of past conversations that seemed to replay the final frantic days of the hospital's operation. The lights from their flashlights started to flicker more aggressively, casting dancing shadows that distorted the reality around them. Suddenly, Emily screamed as her light briefly illuminated a figure standing in the corner. A fleeting glimpse of something human-shaped, but impossibly distorted, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. 9. Urged on by fear and the desperate hope of finding a way out, they pressed on, coming across an old, moldy library filled with water-damaged books and broken furniture. The smell of mildew was overwhelming, and the books seemed to be rotting from the inside out, their pages swollen and warped. In the dim light, the titles on the spines were just legible enough to hint at psychiatric theories now long discredited, adding an eerie layer of outdated medical knowledge to the foreboding atmosphere. Suddenly, the floor beneath them gave a dangerous creak, and before they could react, the floorboard splintered under Tyler's feet, sending him crashing down into the darkness below. The others rushed to the hole, their screams for Tyler echoing unanswered. The gap revealed a lower level they hadn't realized existed, a basement that seemed to swallow light and sound alike. Frantically, they found a way down to the basement, a decrepit stairway creaking ominously under their weight. The basement was vast and pitch black, extending beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. As they called out for Tyler, their own voices seemed muted, as if absorbed by the thick, oppressive darkness that filled the space. The air was cooler here, and the faint, disturbing sound of dripping water punctuated the silence, suggesting the vast, unseen boundaries of this subterranean nightmare. Their search became more desperate as they navigated the basement's labyrinthine layout, encountering remnants of old medical equipment and eerie, rusted surgical tables that hinted at long-forgotten procedures. The oppressive atmosphere was suffocating, the darkness almost tangible. As they finally found Tyler, it was too late. He was lying motionless, his flashlight beside him casting a weak, flickering light. His face was turned away, and as they approached, a chilling realization set in. Tyler was not alone. There in the dim light, several shadowy figures stood silently around him, their features indistinct, but their presence unmistakably ominous. Michael had just moved to San Francisco to start a new life after a painful divorce. He found an apartment in an old building on the outskirts of the city, which, according to the real estate agent, had been vacant for several years due to its reputation as an unlucky place. Soon after moving in, Michael began to notice strange things. Things weren't where he left them, and sounds of footsteps at night, even though he lived alone. His first explanation was simple: stress and fatigue from changing his living situation. But when food started disappearing from the refrigerator, Michael knew he had to find another explanation. He installed security cameras, hoping to catch an unwanted guest, but what he saw only intensified his anxiety. The recordings showed doors of cabinets opening by themselves and books falling from shelves without apparent cause. And although no one could be seen doing this, Michael felt an invisible presence. He decided to spend a night on the sofa, watching the live feed from the cameras. That's when he first heard the whisper. The voice was soft and barely audible, but there was a sinister threat in it, The whisper pronounced his name, stretching each syllable. Michael didn't sleep that night. The next day, he turned to a local parish priest who advised him to have the house blessed. The priest arrived with his assistant, armed with holy water and Latin prayers. The blessing process seemed ordinary, but when they entered the bedroom where Michael most often heard whispers, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The temperature in the room dropped, and the candles that the priest had set up went out one by one. Michael, standing next to the priest, saw a shadow flit through the room, pausing briefly by the window. The priest began to pray louder, and the shadow, it seemed, reacted by dispersing into the air. After the blessing, it seemed that the unusual phenomena had stopped. For several weeks, Michael heard no whispers or noises and felt more confident in his new home. But one evening, as he was preparing dinner, something happened that brought all his fears back. The sounds returned, but this time they were louder and more aggressive. Kitchen utensils flew out of drawers and fell to the floor with a loud crash. Michael stepped back to the wall, watching as pots and pans clanged against each other in midair. After the terrifying event in the kitchen, Michael decided he needed help. He called his friend Tom, who had experience with paranormal phenomena. Tom arrived with a set of professional equipment, EMF detectors, infrared cameras, and a digital recorder for EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. They spent the entire night setting up the equipment and monitoring for any activity. Around 3 in the morning, the EMF detector suddenly spiked in the living room, where Michael most often heard whispers. Tom turned on the recorder, and within minutes they captured indistinct but clear whispers. Excited yet frightened, they continued to monitor the signals. After several hours of observation, something unexpected happened. Amid the silence of the night room, a loud scream suddenly echoed, and a book from the shelf flew into the air, crashing to the floor with a loud thud. Both men froze in fear. Tom reassured Michael and assured him that this was part of the process of making contact with the unknown. They decided to listen to the recording, and the audio clearly captured something whispering Michael's name over and over again. By morning, exhausted but determined, they gathered all the data and headed to a paranormal research expert at the nearest university. Professor Lindsay, who specialized in paranormal psychology, carefully examined the recordings and data they had collected. She mentioned that the whispers and EMF readings might indicate an attached spirit who perhaps has unfinished business in the world of the living or feels a connection to Michael or the apartment. The professor suggested conducting a seance to try to communicate with the spirit to find out what it seeks or why it cannot leave this place. Michael, though skeptical, agreed. They arranged the seance in his apartment that same night. A semicircular setup, candles, and the mysterious dim light created an atmosphere almost instantly filled with a sense of anticipation. During the seance, as Professor Lindsay began to summon the spirit, the room grew colder. New whispers appeared on the recorder, and they were much clearer than before. The spirit's voice seemed weary and confused. It asked for help and pointed towards a corner of the room where an old photograph stood, which Michael had found among the previous owner's belongings. As the seance deepened into the night, the air in the room thickened, shadows seemed to dance along the walls, and the temperature dropped noticeably. The candles flickered as if in response to a breath that wasn't there, and a heavy silence enveloped the room. Professor Lindsay's voice grew more intense as she called out to the spirit, urging it to communicate its desires. Michael, although skeptical at first, could not deny the palpable tension that filled the room. He held his breath as a cold draft swept across the room, and the old photograph suddenly slid off the shelf, landing softly on the carpet. The professor paused, her eyes fixed on the photograph. She instructed Michael to pick it up and examine it. As he held the photograph, a sense of overwhelming sadness washed over him. The image showed a young woman standing by the same window in his living room, her expression somber. Professor Lindsay explained that this was the previous tenant, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago, leaving behind no trace except for this photograph. She suggested that the spirit they were communicating with might be hers, possibly still lingering due to unresolved grief or trauma. Encouraged to address the spirit directly, Michael spoke to the photograph, asking the spirit to share her story or to move on peacefully. The air stirred again, and a soft, feminine voice filled the room, audible only to Michael. It spoke of loneliness and betrayal, of love lost, and a life abruptly ended in this very apartment. The voice pleaded with Michael to help her find peace by uncovering the truth about her disappearance. Determined to aid the restless spirit, Michael started investigating the woman's past, delving into old news articles and police records. His quest led him to discover a chilling truth. The woman had been a victim of a crime, her partner at the time a suspect who had swiftly left town after her disappearance. The investigation had stalled with no conclusive evidence to prove foul play, but now, armed with the spirit's own words, Michael felt compelled to bring her case back to light. His involvement, however, drew unwanted attention. Strange occurrences escalated in his apartment, objects moved violently, and threatening whispers filled his nights. Undeterred, Michael continued his pursuit for justice, not realizing the danger he was putting himself in. The more he discovered, the more intense the paranormal activities became. One night, as Michael was piecing together old letters and photographs that hinted at the motive behind the woman's disappearance, the atmosphere in his apartment shifted drastically. The air grew dense, the temperature plummeted, and the feeling of dread overwhelmed him. As he tried to leave, doors slammed shut, trapping him inside. The ghostly figure of the young woman appeared, her face contorted with rage and sorrow, screaming accusations and expressing her torment. Michael, trapped and desperate, realized too late that his efforts to help had inadvertently bound the spirit more tightly to the physical world. Her anguish and desire for vengeance had grown too strong, fueled by the uncovering of her tragic past. In his final moments, as the ghostly apparition advanced towards him, Michael understood that some mysteries are better left unsolved. His last thought was a regretful acknowledgement of his failure to release her spirit, which now seemed doomed to haunt him and the apartment forever.